Keaton Monroe had spent years building his life from nothing, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. He was the provider, the rock, the man who never faltered. Long nights, endless deadlines, and unwavering devotion defined his existence. But in one devastating moment, everything he had worked for shattered. As Keaton stood in the doorway of his own home, the scene before him was a nightmare come to life. His wife of 17 years, Melissa, was tangled in the sheets with another man, his best friend, Tyler Corbin. The truth was undeniable, and the betrayal cut deeper than any wound he had ever known. Melissa's golden hair spilled over the pillow like a twisted vision of a love story gone wrong. Tyler, his once trusted friend, smirked with arrogance, his tattooed arm draped possessively around Melissa's waist. Keaton's daughter, Sandra, stood behind him, her expression not of shock or sorrow but of contempt. "Why don't you just disappear, Dad?" she spat, her words sharper than any blade. But Keaton didn't break. He didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't fall to his knees. Instead, he looked at the people he had spent his life protecting and saw strangers. Without a word, he turned and walked away, his mind already calculating his next move. Keaton didn't drown himself in sorrow or seek solace in a bar. Instead, he got to work. The small, sterile apartment he rented that night became his war room. With a desk, a laptop, and a notebook, he mapped out every asset, every investment, every financial thread that Melissa had relied on. The house, the car, the investments, all were in his name. For 17 years, Melissa had spent his money while he worked tirelessly to earn it. Now he was taking it all back. By morning, joint accounts were closed, assets were transferred, and every financial lifeline Melissa had was severed. It took 3 days for her to realize what had happened. Her credit card was declined at the grocery store. Sandra's college fund was gone. The mortgage bill arrived with only Keaton's name on it. The texts and calls started pouring in, but Keaton ignored them all. Melissa's voicemails grew increasingly desperate. "You son of a!" she screamed in the final message. "You think you can just take everything from me? I'll ruin you." Keaton saved the voicemail. It would make excellent evidence in court. On the 5th day, Keaton returned to the house, not to confront them, but to observe. Tyler's truck was still parked in the driveway, and laughter spilled through the windows. They thought they had won. They thought Keaton had lost. But they were wrong. Keaton knew Tyler's secrets. The man wasn't just a parasite. He was a serial cheater with gambling debts and a trail of lies. With a few clicks, Keaton hacked into Tyler's email and social media, uncovering explicit messages to multiple women, bank statements showing his debts, and even a pawn shop receipt for the luxury watch he had bragged about buying. Keaton compiled the evidence and sent it to Melissa from a fake account. 3 hours later, Melissa called. "I know it's you," she hissed. "I know you sent those emails." Keaton sipped his coffee, unfazed. "Interesting perspective. I only reclaimed what was mine," he replied calmly. "By the way, you should probably get tested. Who knows where Tyler's been?" That night, the house erupted in chaos. Tyler stumbled out the door, clutching a duffel bag as Melissa hurled insults at him. "You lied to me," she shrieked. Tyler's face burned with humiliation. "You think Keaton did this? He's the one laughing right now," he shouted before peeling out of the driveway. With Tyler gone, Keaton turned his attention to Melissa. She had never worked a day in her life, living off his sacrifices while playing the role of the perfect suburban wife. Now she was standing in the wreckage of her own making. Keaton watched from across the street as she sat on the porch steps, barefoot and broken, gripping her phone like it held the key to salvation. But her world had crumbled, and there was no going back. The final blow came when Keaton revoked Melissa's access to the house and all accounts tied to it. Legally, she was now nothing more than a tenant in his home, and tenants could be evicted. As Melissa stormed into the bank the next morning, demanding answers, Keaton leaned back in his car, a smirk playing on his lips. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 was just beginning. Melissa Monroe stood in the bank, her face pale with shock. "I don't understand," she hissed at the branch manager, Patricia, a middle-aged woman who had known Keaton for years. Why are my accounts frozen? Why can't I access my own money? Patricia glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Monroe, all the accounts in question are under Mr. Keaton Monroe's name. You are listed as a secondary party, not an owner. Melissa's eyes widened in horror. That can't be right. I've been using those accounts for years. You've been spending from them for years, Patricia corrected gently. But you never owned them. Melissa staggered back as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. My mortgage, credit lines, vehicle payments, they all belong to Keaton. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She felt sick. She had thought she had won. She had thought she had humiliated him, pushed him out, left him with nothing. But the truth was far worse. Keaton hadn't lost. He had planned this. Sandra Monroe, their daughter, had grown up entitled, spoiled, and ungrateful. Keaton had worked tirelessly to provide her with the best designer clothes, the newest phone, the safest car, but Sandra never saw his sacrifices. She only saw what she felt was missing. The birthdays he missed, the late nights at the office, the weekends he spent building their future instead of playing daddy-daughter picnics in the park. So when Tyler, Melissa's new lover, whispered poison in Sandra's ear, she believed him. She had thrown away the only man who had ever truly loved her, and now she was paying the price. Harvard's deposit deadline had passed. Her dream school, the one Keaton had spent nearly 2 decades saving for, was gone, and now she was left with nothing. Melissa had tried calling Keaton dozens of times, but he never answered until one night. Standing in the cold outside his apartment, her face pale and desperate, she saw his car pull into the parking lot. "Dad," she called, running toward him, her breath visible in the crisp air. Keaton stepped out, his expression unreadable. "How did you find me?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. "Mom had the address from court documents," Sandra admitted, hugging herself for warmth. Keaton said nothing. Sandra swallowed her pride. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I was wrong. I get it now." Keaton tilted his head. "Get what?" Sandra's voice cracked. "How much you did for us, how hard you worked, and how I treated you." Keaton's silence stretched like an executioner's paw. "Dad," she pleaded, stepping closer. "I need you." Keaton let out a slow exhale. Once, those words would have undone him. Once, he would have moved mountains for his daughter. But that man was gone. "You made your decision," he said, his voice steady and cold. "Now live with it." And he walked past her, leaving her standing alone in the dark. Melissa had tried everything. She begged. She cried. She even tried charming her way back into Keaton's life. But when none of that worked, she resorted to threats. "You can't just cut us off like this," she shrieked one night outside his apartment door. "I'll take you for everything in the divorce." Keaton simply sipped his coffee and closed the door in her face. The next day, she tried to hire a lawyer, only to discover that Keaton had already retained the top 3 attorneys in the city, ensuring none of them could take her case. One by one, her options dried up until finally, the court ruling came in. Her divorce settlement was the bare minimum. She had thrown away a man who had given her everything, and now she was left with nothing. Keaton drove past his former home one last time. The for sale sign had been replaced with sold. Melissa and Sandra had already moved into her sister's garage apartment, living in a single-room space with barely any privacy. Sandra was now working a part-time job at a fast food restaurant, her former friends avoiding her like the plague. Melissa, once the queen of suburban socialites, was now invisible to the people who once praised her. She had reached out to old acquaintances, old lovers, old friends, and all of them had done exactly what she had done to Keaton. They had discarded her. Keaton felt nothing as he watched another family move into what was once his home because he had already built something better. 6 months later, Keaton Monroe was untouchable. He had been promoted, leading a new engineering division at a top firm. He had moved into a high-rise condo overlooking the city with a view fit for a king, and most importantly, he had moved on. Ivanka Palmer sat across from him at dinner, her auburn hair catching the glow of the candlelight. She said, swirling her wine, "Are you finally done looking over your shoulder?" Keaton thought about it. He thought about Melissa, alone and aging. He thought about Sandra, learning how cruel the world could be. He thought about Tyler, working under the Arizona sun, a broken man with no future, and for the first time in a long, long time he smiled. "Yeah," he said, lifting his glass. "I'm done." And he had won. Melissa Monroe had once been the queen of a suburban castle. Now, she was nothing more than a washed-up relic, living in her sister's cramped garage apartment, scraping by on the last shreds of her dignity. She had gone from sipping wine with wealthy friends to searching job listings on an outdated laptop. From bragging about designer brands to cutting coupons for groceries. From hosting dinner parties to working a dead-end job as a receptionist in a rundown insurance office. Melissa Monroe had finally come to understand something terrifying. She wasn't special. She had never built anything of her own. She had merely taken from Keaton, taken from Tyler, taken from the world, and now there was nothing left to take. Sandra Monroe had always been the girl who had everything. She had spent her teenage years flaunting her privilege, mocking those beneath her, rolling her eyes whenever her father asked her to be responsible. Now, she was working the late shift at a fast food restaurant, forced to take orders from kids she once considered beneath her. Every shift felt like an exercise in humiliation. Her old friends were nowhere to be seen. Harvard, a dream that would never be, was gone. Her future was uncertain. She had thought that choosing Tyler over her father was the right move. Now she realized, too late, that she had burned the only bridge that mattered, and no matter how many times she tried to call Keaton, he never picked up, because Keaton Monroe was no longer her father. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. One cold evening, Keaton's phone rang again. The caller ID was blocked, but he already knew who it was. Against his better judgment, he answered. A small, fragile voice whispered, "Keaton, please don't hang up." "Melissa," Keaton said, leaning back in his chair, listening to the desperation in her tone. I need to see you," she stammered. Keaton's voice was like steel wrapped in ice. "Why?" Melissa hesitated. "'Cause I miss you." He let out a slow, humorless chuckle. "Miss me?" he repeated, his voice dripping with cold amusement. "Or miss what I gave you?" Melissa inhaled sharply. "Keaton, please, I don't have anyone else." Keaton didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. "That was your choice," he said simply, and then he hung up for good. 6 months had passed since Keaton had walked away. 6 months since he had dismantled their lives, piece by piece. Now, standing outside what was once his home, he watched as the final chapter closed. A new family was moving in. A young couple with bright eyes and hopeful dreams. They had no idea what had happened in that house, no idea of the betrayal, the heartbreak, the revenge. As Keaton watched them unpack boxes and laugh together, he realized something. This was the first time in years that he felt at peace. Keaton had erased Melissa and Sandra from his life, but he knew they were still out there, living in the ruins of their choices. Melissa, fading into obscurity, stuck in a job she hated, her looks no longer enough to save her. Sandra, struggling to hold on to a future that had slipped through her fingers, forced to work for every dollar she once took for granted. And Tyler, gone. No one had heard from him in months. Rumors said he had left town, broke and beaten down, running from debts he could never pay. Keaton had won, but it wasn't just revenge that satisfied him. It was knowing that they finally understood what they had done, and that was enough. The man Keaton had once been was gone. The man he had become was stronger, unbreakable, untouchable. His career had skyrocketed. His new division was thriving, and his personal life was better than ever. Ivanka sat across from him at dinner, watching him carefully. "You seem lighter," she noted. Keaton smirked. "I think I finally let go." Ivanka's gaze softened. "Good. Because you deserve more than a life spent looking back." For the first time in years, Keaton realized she was right. And as he reached for her hand, he felt something foreign settle inside him. Something he hadn't known in a long time. Happiness. Months later, Keaton received one final letter. The return address. Riverbank, Melissa's new home. He opened it, his eyes scanning the messy handwriting. Keaton, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it. I lost everything, and I have no one to blame but myself. Goodbye. Keaton stared at the letter for a long moment, then he burned it. Because Melissa Monroe no longer existed in his world. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. And Keaton Monroe, he had won.